Hello YouTube, Wadres is here again for you all, and today I am going to be doing some matches and talking about the Tier 8 Imperial Japanese destroyer, the Akizuki, well known for her small, rapid-firing 100mm main armament, and some rather poor maneuverability and concealment. I am running her with Concealment Systems Mod 1, Steering Gears Mod 2, Aiming Systems Mod 1, Propulsion Mod 1, and Main Armaments Mod 1. I am also running her with all premium consumables simply because, well, cooldown time is a definite bonus. I am running her with a 14-point captain who has Concealment Expert, Inertial Fuse High Explosive, Basic Firing Training, Last Stand, and Preventative Maintenance. I would also kind of like to pop back and point out that I am also running her fully upgraded with her B hull, her range modification, and her torpedo upgrade. Now, one of the things that I do want to show you all very quickly is this Excel sheet that I've put together regarding stats for concealment, rudder shift, and turning radius of all of the Tier 8 destroyers. And I will get to why this is relevant in a very short time. One of the things that I want you all to make note of is that the Akizuki is, by my classification, about midline in regards to where her concealment is. She is the worst in class turning radius for Tier 8 destroyers, and she is tied with the Z-23 for worst midline as far as the speed of her rudder shift. I went over all of these numbers with a fine-tooth comb. I can guarantee with 100% certainty that they are accurate, especially everything talking about the rudder mods. Now, some of you may contest, why would you put rudder mods on a destroyer? They already have pretty fast rudder shifts. Well, in some cases it is a little bit necessary, just because sometimes they are a little bit slower, and destroyers are supposed to be small, nimble ships, and they rely a lot on their maneuverability to dodge incoming fire from larger ships like cruisers and battleships. So it can occasionally be beneficial, instead of going with a acquisition or artillery modification or something like that, to apply a minor buff to your rudder shift just to make your ship that much more agile to get away from a lot of that incoming fire. And the Akizuki is not exactly the best, but she's not entirely the worst, at least as things stand. She does have the worst in class turning radius again, and her rudder shift and concealment aren't exactly stellar, but you can at least take some comfort in the fact that she is beat out by the Germans and the Russians as far as, or I should say that she beats out the Germans and the Russians for her concealment and rudder shift time. I will also say again, these numbers are accurate. The only thing that is not fully calculated is the concealment, and the only reason I say that is because I forgot to calculate in the concealment buff provided by camouflages. Other than that, numbers are accurate. Please don't say that they aren't. I've gone over them 3 or 4 times and added and removed modules to ships to verify them. Now, I suppose I should probably get into what I'm moving towards with all of this information. I have been watching my feed over the last couple of days for my subscription channels, and a couple of the primary community contributors that I pay attention to, namely Natser, Flamu, and a couple of others, have been talking about some proposed changes that Wargaming is wanting to make to a wide array of ships. Talking about buffing the turret rotation of the Yamato, some nerfs to the French battleships, so on and so forth. But the one thing that's really been catching my attention have been proposed changes to the Imperial Japanese gunboat destroyers, and more notably, a kind of universal overhaul to the 100mm guns as a whole. Now, this is a rather dramatic change, and it does carry with it a heavy nerf to the Akizuki and the as of yet in development Kitakaze and Harugumo. That being said, I will leave it to you all to decide where you lie on the matter, but I have a few strong opinions myself, and I would like to voice them. The buff that is being proposed for the 100mm guns is that they are wanting to give them a base penetration value of 25mm of armor penetration for high explosive shells on the 100mm cannons. The only thing I can think about that right off the top of my head is, holy shit, that's a lot of penetration. There are some cruisers with substantially heavier caliber guns that don't even have that kind of penetration. And this is basically being given to these 100mm cannon destroyers. Now, this is also, as I mentioned, going to be a complete overhaul to the 100mm guns in general. So any ships that have these 100mm guns as secondary batteries are also going to get this penetration buff. So it would be an increase in the power of their secondary battery artillery. These destroyers, however, would benefit greatly, and it is, in a way, a needed buff, because as it stands right now with the 1/6 caliber penetration calculations, they just don't have enough penetration to really do much of anything, even if they're hitting superstructures of lightly armored ships. You should not be dealing with shatters of your main battery armament when firing against the main armor belt of destroyers, and yet that's what these destroyers end up having to work with. That is why, in general, anybody who has the Akizuki as one of their main ships, basically one of the required skills for their commanders in order to make these ships even remotely effective is to have the inertial fuse high explosive skill on their commanders. Now, Wargaming, trying to make it less of a necessity and more of an option, are giving the 100mm cannons this penetration buff. It's all well and good, except now, instead of making it a necessity as far as actually being able to do damage, now it's basically becoming a necessity for being able to dominate damn near anything that comes down the line at you. Because with the inertial fuse high explosive applied to these now baseline 25mm penetration shells, these ships are going to be capable of penetrating 32 to 33mm of armor, which that is the bow armor on most tier 10 battleships. So this is actually a fairly high value to be giving to these shells, and it makes them rather formidable. It is, not granted it is consistent penetration damage that these ships have needed for a long time, but I'm really thinking that 25mm of penetration is way too powerful. Yes, again, this is a much needed change for these ships, but again, way too powerful. It's a little bit too much. I think Wargaming would do better to maybe drop it down to a more reasonable 20 or flat 19mm of penetration to at least make it worthwhile against destroyers without giving it so much power against heavily armored cruisers and battleships. It would still allow these destroyers to fill a destroyer hunter role without becoming too overpowered by comparison. And this kind of comes around to and that would actually be a more reasonable proposal than what they're planning in regards to a nerf to these gunboat destroyers to make up for this dramatic increase in their penetration capability. Now, the Kitakaze and the Harugumo, as far as their development and design, are already going to have this nerf worked into them as they are developed. However, the Akizuki would definitely feel this nerf quite substantially because it would have to be added to the ship versus being introduced with it, already worked in. And what this nerf that they are proposing is that they are going to somehow nerf the concealment and maneuverability of the Akizuki, and the already worked-in nerf to the concealment and maneuverability of the Kitakaze and the Harugumo in order to compensate for the power increase of their main batteries. And that's where I kind of have to go back to my chart talking about where the Akizuki is in regard to its maneuverability and concealment already, in that it is very close to being one of the worst in class already for all three. It's certainly worst in class already regarding its overall turning circle. These destroyers rely on their maneuverability to basically be able to dodge and evade incoming fire. It is their lifeblood for any destroyer, as a matter of fact, not just the Japanese gunboats. Taking that away really hurts them quite dramatically. Now, they do have somewhat decent health pools because they are larger ships, and I can understand that they are going to have some maneuverability downsides for being larger than your typical destroyer. That being said, again, watching Notzer and a couple of the other community contributors, the Harugumo, as she is, has a larger turning circle than a Tier 10 battleship, namely the HMS Conqueror. I do not see any logical reason why a destroyer, even a large destroyer, should have a turning circle that is larger than that of a battleship. The Akizuki, as she is, already has a larger turning circle than all of the other destroyers at her tier. I haven't compared her with any of the Tier 9s or the Tier 10s, but she certainly does not have a healthy turning circle. Nerf that any more than it already is by comparison to other ships in her class. I sincerely think that that is actually going to be a death knell for this line of Japanese gunboat ships, as opposed to a help, even in light of the actual buff to the penetration of her main battery shells. Yes, these guns are going to be very powerful, and at that, it is a much needed increase to the guns. That being said, I don't think they need to be increased so much that a nerf this drastic to the performance of the ship itself is necessary. I firmly believe that a smaller increase to the penetration would be far more effective without having to basically kill the maneuverability of the ship in order to compensate for it in a power creep. Under those circumstances, it seems more like Wargaming's typical habit of applying the sledgehammer to solve a problem when they really don't. If they were to finesse the issue a little bit better, it would be a lot more workable. Instead of basically giving these destroyers god-tier level of penetration and no maneuverability to speak of. I I think that's going a little bit too far as any changes made to these ships. Again, the destroyers rely on their concealment and maneuverability for their survival. And on top of that, there are other things that I think they could change in order to compensate for the power creep of the guns. They could make the guns a little bit more fragile. They could make it so that the guns, maybe instead of being destroyed, just get knocked out more easily. They could reduce the health of the ship so that they have to be more reliant on being able to dodge damage. Something else that they could do is nerf the actual power of the high explosive shells themselves. Instead of doing as much damage, say they become more like doing bug bites worth of damage for these 100mm shells. So even though you have more reliable penetration damage, the actual damage done isn't quite as dramatic as it would be. That in and of itself, I think, would be a far better change than basically killing the maneuverability of these ships. In fact, it would be a far more reasonable change, I think, than doing such a fundamental change to these ships as to basically kill them. I know that if the Akizuki were to perform or maneuver any worse than she already does, it would certainly destroy any of my interest in her, or my desire to play her for that matter. If I'm going to not be able to do one of the fundamental jobs of a destroyer, which is to dodge incoming fire while putting out fire on enemy ships, it seriously detracts from everything that would otherwise be attractive in this ship line. I don't care how much more power these shells are going to get. If I can't dodge the fire that's coming at me, especially in co-op where I'm facing the same ships, I certainly don't want to be playing in that ship anymore. It really doesn't help the ship. It detracts from the ship. It detracts very heavily from the ship, for that matter. Even more so when you consider the fact that ships like the Akizuki, I mean, the nice benefit of the Akizuki was that she was an improvement regarding her guns over her predecessors in this tech line, the Shiratsuyu and the Hatsuharu, which still have the notably crappy, I should say famously crappy, 127mm Japanese destroyer guns. The destroyer guns that have low damage, exceptionally long reloads, and still have relatively low maneuverability, to the point where even as being members of the Japanese gunboat destroyer line, they are still more reliant on their torpedoes than they are on their guns. The Akizuki, at least, is substantially more reliant on its guns because it only has one torpedo launcher. Granted, you do get the torpedo reload booster, but the penetration of the guns suffers by comparison. So having the buff to the guns and making it at least, having these guns at least be reasonable is nice, but again, killing the maneuverability of these ships, and I will keep coming back to that over and over, as I already have, it seems very counterintuitive. There are so many more ways that Wargaming could compensate for the increase in power of these guns by simply improving their penetration than by basically taking away the lifeblood of the destroyer in both its concealment and maneuverability. It's quite a conundrum, to say the least. Now, I will say that as it is, I love playing the Akizuki when I do get around playing her. I mean, yes, I am still doing power building and grinding for other ship lines, but when I do play the Akizuki, I love the rapid fire. I love the sheer damage output she has when she's fighting destroyers. She is at least something of a viable threat to cruisers when she can get a decent broadside. Her armor piercing certainly wrecks them all to hell. But just overall, when I do try to get in maneuverability fights with the destroyers, especially other gunboat destroyers like, say, the Benson or the Z-23, the Ognivoy, the Kiev, she does suffer quite dramatically, even though her guns are at least capable of doing something to them. So having her maneuverability taken away from her, or making it even worse, again, there are other ways that you could, there are so many other ways Wargaming could compensate for that. I think that a more reasonable increase to the penetration of the high explosive shells could actually make up for a lot of the changes without having to make any dramatic nerfs at all. I think a proposed increase to 20 millimeters as opposed to 25 would be far more reasonable. It would take away the sheer power that would be given by a 25 millimeter increase, especially with the IFHE. It would still make the IFHE somewhat relevant, but it would at least not make it to the point where even a tier 10 battleship has to legitimately fear these 100 millimeter shells. But in the end, Wargaming is going to do what they decide to do, and that's one of the things that Notzer and all of the other community contributors kind of really have some opinions on as well. They really don't like the fact that it's something that's being baked into the ships that are already proposed as coming out, and it does kind of give the indicator that it's the direction they're going to go, regardless of what anybody says. Even though they do say that they listen to the community contributors, but Notzer and a few of the community contributors have mentioned that they really don't see that happening as much as Wargaming would like to believe. And for someone like a general content creator like me, who's just putting videos out for the fun of it, they're definitely not going to listen to me. So, I guess it is what it is. Now, I suppose I will come back to the chart as a conclusion for my video, just give you all a nice, reasonable place to pause and look at the chart again, and just kind of look at where these numbers stand, see where the Akizuki fits in, and kind of get the gauge for how much worse I guess she could be, and just kind of hope and pray that maybe something changes where it's not going to end up being the case. So on that note, I guess I shall let you all go. I shall talk to you all next time I put out my videos. Have a good one.